Hi everyone, I'm Matthew Deeprose from the University of Southampton. Welcome to this Lunch and Learn at TechShare Pro 2022 titled Making Accessibility Simpler in Higher Education and Beyond. I'm a white male in my mid-40s wearing a pink shirt with a black jacket and matching pocket square. My pronouns are he, him. I've been working in higher education IT for more than 20 years. Since I found out about the public sector body's accessibility regulations 2018, I've been learning about accessibility, finding opportunities to put it into practice, and looking for ways to share what I learn with others. Some recent accessibility projects I've been involved in have been refreshing our virtual learning environment to have an updated on-brand theme that meets and surpasses accessibility guidelines as much as possible, designing an accessibility testing process, running our digital accessibility community of practice, and designing and delivering accessibility-focused webinars. We use Blackboard Ally, and I've recently become co-chair of the European Blackboard Ally user group, and I'm also a member of the UCISA Diversity Task Force. And you can find out more about me and the work that I'm doing on my website at matthewdeeprose.github.io. You can find my LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube there. Feel free to connect with me, and please do give me feedback on this session. You can use Slido to ask questions, and you can also find a link in there to the dedicated captions from Stream Text. You should also be able to pin Tim and later probably Bridget, our BSL interpreters. All right, let's get started. So in my work, accessibility is about removing barriers that might prevent people from making the most out of our organization's digital estate, in particular for those with disabilities or impairments, be they permanent, situational, or temporary. This is particularly important within the educational context because education has a significant impact on our lives. And thinking in terms of removing barriers can sound quite simple, but we will find complexity and puzzles to solve. First, for our own understanding, and then for how we can explain and empower our colleagues to take action on removing those barriers. And for me, the key is finding sets of steps we can use to solve these puzzles. So in this session, I'm going to use examples from my recent work to show how I've attempted to answer some of these questions. How can we demystify writing alternative text for complex images like charts and graphs? How can we simplify accessible brand palette color choices? And how can we amplify engagement with accessibility within our organization? And since this is a lunch and learn session, I'll be sharing links and resources, some of my own, some from others in the accessibility profession. You might have heard of some, but hopefully there will be something new and interesting for everyone. And if they're useful, you can use them straight away. And I'm aiming to give you lots of resources. And at the end of this presentation, I'll do a quick fire run through a whole load more resources that I recommend that can help to demystify, simplify, and amplify. And I'm speaking from my experience working in higher education IT, but to a greater or lesser extent, everything I cover today is likely to be useful for any organization. And the slide deck and all of the resources I'll be discussing are available from my presentation webpage. You can reach it at this address, go.soton, that's SOTON, .ac.uk/TSP for TechShare Pro. And the link also appears in the footer of every slide. First, let's look at writing alternative text for complex images like charts and graphs. How have I tried to demystify that process? Missing or poorly composed alternative text is one of the top accessibility issues affecting learning content at my university. It's also the second most common accessibility issue that the Web Accessibility in Mind, WebAIM organization found in their survey of the 1 million most popular web pages. There's also lots of good examples out there, but when you do a quick Google search, you might find fairly basic guides that use quite simple images as examples. It can be difficult to find advice around those more complex images we might use in education and elsewhere. Writing alternative text is really important. Many universities use systems such as Blackboard Ally or Census Access that provide students with alternative formats, such as an audio version. So good quality alternative text really helps students to get the most out of alternative formats. We recently designed and ran a 30-minute session about writing alternative text for images, charts, and graphs. We covered 6 examples, from basic images to more complex ones like graphs, decision trees, and Venn diagrams. Now, rather than go into detail about that session, because you can review the recording, slides, and materials online in your own time, I want to highlight which resources were really useful for me in creating that session. Now, Diagram Center have a really good YouTube video on describing complex images. It's quite old now, but they get through a lot of different image types. The Northwest Evaluation Association, NWEA, has produced an incredible resource on writing alternative text for images that are used in assessments. So how can you describe an image without giving away the answer? That's an incredible resource if you write quizzes or assessments. Many of you will be aware of the Poet training tool that has exercises you can follow to learn more about writing alternative text. If you've not come across it before, I recommend it. Now, those previous resources were freely available. This next resource is amazing, but it has a cost, from about £400 a year for access for free users. Textbox Digital's Described service provides guidance and worked examples of writing alternative text for different types of image. On screen, I'm listing the types of image they cover. Examples include diagrams, graphs, illustrations, maps, and scientific images such as circuit diagrams. I'm now sharing a list of examples from the graph section. This includes area charts, box and whisker plots, and dot plots. When you select an image, or when you select an image type, Described provides an overall set of guidance, a step-by-step process, and a worked example with a final complete description. And once you have that process that you can then follow, it really helps you to unlock what once might have been a mystery, and it can help to make it seem simple. And some high-level strategies for all descriptions are to consider the context in which we use the image, our intended audience, and the function or purpose of that image. You might write different descriptions for the same image as and when the context, audience, and function changes. And for more complex images, a full description should include the title, the construction of the image, a summary or overview, and a data table, if relevant. So even if you have some really complex images you need to describe, there's lots of resources out there that can help you. Of course, even with a structured process, you still need that subject matter expertise once you get to writing the descriptions. Next, I'm going to speak to the question of how can we simplify making accessible color choices. Insufficient color contrast is the most prevalent issue reported in the Web A Million. It's something that's so easy to get right, but you have to know about it. And as many will know, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines state that with a contrast ratio of 3:1, that's the minimum level of contrast for graphical objects like icons. 4.5:1 is the minimum for text, and 7:1 and higher is the minimum for text if we want to reach that AAA level of accessibility. But for someone that's new to accessibility, this probably seems quite intimidating. If someone just wants to use our brand color palette, how can they make accessible choices easily? So most organizations, including universities, have corporate color schemes aligned with their brand. And they're likely to be part of PowerPoint and Word templates with brand colors included in the theme. And websites and online applications are likely to use the brand colors, not only for content, but for the whole user interface, including hover states, focus indicators, and so on. And yesterday, Heather from Skyscanner was talking about the work that they had done to create a new brand color palette that was more accessible. Now, when I was redesigning the color theme for our virtual learning environment, I was frequently looking up the contrast ratios of colors from our brand. To save me time, I built a lookup table with all 441 possible color combinations. Over time, I turned this into a web page. And just to zoom in and give a clearer understanding, the same colors are in the same order for both the horizontal and vertical axes. And where two colors meet, the table shows F if it fails all contrast criteria, G if it can be used for graphical objects, so it's got 3:1 contrast or higher. AA means that as well as for graphical objects, it can be used for text, so that's 4.5:1 or higher, but only at that minimum AA level. And AAA means it can be used for text at the enhanced level, as well, of course, for graphical objects. And I've been using that a lot, and so have a number of my colleagues. It's become more and more popular over the years since I put it together. To give you one example of how I've used the color matrix recently, In the past couple of months, I've been creating some infographics. To make them more visually interesting, I've been using vector-based stock images, such as the one on screen, which is a slightly abstract illustration of a computer screen with a woman holding a settings symbol and a file transfer symbol. To make these images more congruent, I recolor them using my university's brand, and the matrix really helped me to quickly pick colors that will have sufficient contrast with each other. And this is a small part of an infographic I'm producing that explains our pilot process for new educational technology tools. And since I wrote a script to create the color matrix, I can feed it with the colors of any brand. So if it would be useful for you, there's info on my presentation webpage about how to request one for your brand. Now, a few months after making the script, I found that others had the same idea and have similar tools online. And if I'd have found this out before, I probably wouldn't have gone to the trouble of making my own. On screen is the accessible color palette builder and a tool called Contrast Grid that offer very similar functionality. Note that while I've tested my own content for accessibility, I haven't tested the third-party sites that I'll be sharing in this presentation. Now, I've got links on the support site to both of these tools. I'm going to give you a quick demo of Contrast Grid. So now I'm going to try a live demo, so wish me luck. I've just got to find my web browser. Here we are, and I've got to find my list of colors. So here is the Contrast Grid website. And from a notepad, I'm just going to paste in all of the colors from my brand color scheme. And now you see it instantly, it created a very similar matrix to what I showed you that I had made, where I've got all of the colors and I can see, do they have a AA, AAA? Could they be used for graphics, or should we just not use them at all? I'm not so happy about how this isn't responsive, so it's not going to work very well on mobile phones, but it is really fast. And if you want to have a quick check, you probably will find that very useful. So I'm going to go back to my slides now. Now, the color matrix might still be a bit too intimidating for some. I'm always looking for approaches to invite curiosity with accessibility and make it more approachable. A couple of months ago, I was working on another infographic, and a colleague mentioned he hadn't seen one of the color combinations that I'd used before. So I had an idea for a color randomizer that would offer an accessible color combination from our brand. It will give us one background color, one text color, and 3 colors for graphical objects. I'm just going to show you that now. So I'm just going to change to my browser. And let's see if I just refresh this page. I've got a bit of an introduction. And now when I select this randomize button, it will pick a different background color, text color, tells me the hex code for that color, the contrast ratio, what WCAG criteria would it meet, in this case, AAA, and then for graphic colors. This could be anything from 3 to 1 and higher. So here I've got a gray color, a neutral one, because of course we like to have abstract names for our brand colors. And it's showing me the contrast ratio, and again, for the other 3. Then as I select the randomize button, it's going to give me a whole set of new choices from there. And I'm hoping that approaches like this can help to both find new combinations that we might not have used before, and also just to make it something a bit more interactive and approachable in terms of helping our colleagues to make more accessible choices. I'm going to go back to the slide deck now. Now, there's other useful tools out there. You may find yourself wanting to use a color combination that does not have enough contrast. How can you find a color that's a close match for the color you want to use and has sufficient contrast? On screen, I have screenshots of 2 tools that can help you with this: the Tanaguru Contrast Finder and Color Safe. I'm going to show you the Tanaguru Contrast Finder. So I've just gone to my browser. So I'm at the Tanaguru Contrast Finder page, and I want to use a white text with an orange background. And this color orange is from the University of Southampton brand. But I already happen to know that this isn't going to have sufficient contrast for the use of text. And I'm saying I want to aim for at least a 4.5 to 1 contrast ratio, and I have to have a white text color. So look at the background color and give me some colors that are very close to that orange color. Now, I've already run this because I've been burnt several times by live demos. And there it's reminding me of my current choice, this orange with white text, which has a contrast ratio of 2.7 to 1, which is far too low. And it's showing me below a number of similar colors, maybe not quite as bright and orange as my original color, but these do all have a contrast ratio higher than 4.5 to 1. So if I was working with a customer or a client who really said it's got to be orange, but I want to make sure it's accessible, then maybe I can use this tool to find something that's like really close. I should probably tell them that I've changed it, but I think most of the time people may or may not notice. I think that's a really useful tool. I'm going back to my slides now. Another aspect of accessible contrast is when we add text over images. In this example, we have a quote from Jesse Jackson: "When everyone is included, everyone wins," in white text over a photograph of a woman using a refreshable braille display sat beside her service dog. The white text is difficult to read because the photograph has a lot of light colors. There's different strategies to resolving this. We could use a black outline around the text or drop shadow to do something similar. We could just put a solid color behind the text, or we could add a layer over the photo that darkens it, helping to make the text more legible. Now, the optimal overlay finder is a tool that I often use. I'm going to give you a quick demonstration. So if I find here, I have the overlay finder, and I could upload a custom image, which I've already done. And it shows me here an example before and then an example after. So it's telling me that if I were to add a black overlay and use an opacity of, let's call it 52%, then I will have sufficient contrast with between the text and any of the colors that it appears against. I'm just going to show you in PowerPoint how I would approach this. So I've actually already added a black overlay over this photograph, and I'm just waiting for hoping that, yep, my magnifier has arrived. And if I were to change that overlay, if I can pick it up while I'm talking, if I got 0%, I can see, right, I can't see the photo at all now. Whereas 100%, I can see the photo very well because it made that layer invisible. I'm going to select 52%, type that in. And now I have a much better contrast between the text and the background. Of course, maybe I should just choose a different photograph, but if I really had to use that photograph and I wanted to make sure that it was accessible, then that's an approach that I've been using. And by the way, I'll be mentioning this organization Disability in my quickfire round at the end. My final question is, how can we amplify engagement with accessibility across our organization? I'm going to share one small change that I believe has done just that. You're probably aware of the Accessibility Inspector in Office. It appears in Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. You're probably already using it. It can check for 16 different accessibility issues whilst you work. And when it finds accessibility issues, an Accessibility Investigate alert appears, and selecting it will give you an overview of the issues and steps you can follow to improve accessibility. For example, setting the reading order, using headings, resolving contrast issues, adding headings to tables, and so on. But to benefit from this feature, each user has to turn on the Keep Accessibility Checker Running While I Work option for each of Word, PowerPoint, and Excel in the settings. Or an alternative method is that after running an accessibility check in Word, PowerPoint, or Excel, you can select a checkbox within the inspection results panel to keep Accessibility Checker running while I work. But you've got to have actually made an effort to look for accessibility first before you even see that option. What if we could remove these steps? Like many organizations, our university sets up PCs for staff and students. We've got staff machines, and we've got public workstations where students can use computers on campus. Could we just turn on this feature? I checked with the brilliant Microsoft Enterprise Disability Answer Desk, who said it was possible using a tool called Group Policy. They didn't give me a step-by-step, but just knowing it was possible meant that I could follow up with our desktop team at the University of Southampton, and they put this into action for us. We've now implemented the change so the accessibility inspector is running while our staff and students work on university machines. I've also shared an anonymized implementation plan that other organizations can use to make this same change on their PCs. And I've shared a webinar recording and materials for how we explained and demonstrated the benefits of using the Accessibility Inspector. And we only made this change a couple of months ago, but since we're quite used to Microsoft Office changing quite frequently now that we're on Microsoft 365, I'm hoping that lots of our colleagues will be curious to select that button, because they're quite used to seeing new features suddenly appearing in Office now. So they should select that button and find out how they can make their content more accessible. We've already been approached by a senior governance group led at executive level who asked for help to make their Word templates more accessible after they noticed the results of the Accessibility Inspector. It's also proved an interesting conversation starter. In a world of hybrid meetings, we often see when people share their screens, the accessibility status of their documents. So some people have been sharing their tips on how they approach resolving an accessibility issue that they found whilst producing content. I also really like how when the Accessibility Inspector cannot find any images, the button changes to Accessibility Good to Go. We made this one of the key messages in our training, that a resource isn't good to go until the Accessibility Inspector says it's good to go. Now, of course, automated tools can't find all issues, but if we can reach a baseline where everyone's aiming to have no issues which can be detected automatically, then that's going to be quite a step forward. So far, I've shared some of my experiences with demystifying how we write alternative text, simplifying the accessible use of brand color schemes, and amplifying engagement with accessibility. Hopefully, some of these resources were new or interesting to you, and on the presentation website, you can find all of the links. Now, just in case you didn't find anything that we covered so far of interest, I'm going to do a quick fire round, showing some more resources that can help to simplify your accessibility journey. Now, I'm often using stock photo services, and when I look for more inclusive imagery, I'm not sure about how credible some of the images are. I remember a really interesting presentation from Keely Cat Wales and Dan Edge of Sea Talent, which is the links on my presentation site, by the way. And Dan mentioned that he could tell in some images whether someone using a wheelchair was just using it as a prop, and it wasn't really their wheelchair. And both the Disabled and Here collection and the Disability In inclusive stock photo library are available on Creative Commons, so I recommend checking them out. If you're looking for a way to introduce people to digital accessibility, the Accessibility Maze is a web-based game that you and your colleagues can play to learn more about accessibility. It was created to help those new to web accessibility experience firsthand what it's like to encounter accessibility barriers. The game introduces a number of common barriers players must work around, mirroring the experiences of those who encounter those obstacles daily, and provides quick lessons on how to avoid or correct them. If you're looking for tips on how to approach implementing accessibility with an organization, the W3C has a fantastic pathway, planning and managing web accessibility. And some colleagues and I gave a session last year showing how to apply this in an educational context at an event called Making IT Accessible for All. Shifting left is about considering accessibility as early as possible in the development lifecycle. Here's two really useful resources. If you're working with developers, it could be useful to include accessibility within your definition of done, or to use behavior-driven development techniques to ensure your requirements are met. Magentally from T-Mobile provides testing criteria in Gherkin format, which is often used for user stories and in behavior-driven development. And if you're buying a commercial off-the-shelf service, then this accessible IT procurement guide is vital. It has examples of legal clauses you can use during procurement, questions to ask, and so on, and it's aimed specifically at higher education. Ideally, we involve those who use assistive technologies such as screen readers to test our new sites and services, or changes to existing sites and services. Might not always be possible. If you need to do some screen reader testing yourself and you aren't sure how to start, Canaxis has a screen reader testing guide, and the screen reader app developed by the APT Foundation, who are on one of the Lunch and Learn sessions yesterday, is an app to help you to learn how to use a screen reader on a mobile device. On the topic of testing, Alistair McNaught has shared a really useful tools and platforms, quick check accessibility testing spreadsheet. And if you need to do some more deeper testing, the Government Digital Service has a really useful accessibility testing guide. Of course, there's tools like Accessibility Insights, but I assume everyone knows about that one. If you want to build or train your team, Scott O'Hara's accessibility interview questions give some great examples of questions you can ask at interviews, and Teach Access offers an interactive accessibility tutorial for developers and designers. My recommended way to learn about accessibility and keep up to date is through accessibility newsletters and blogs. And as Charlie said in the Accessibility Champions session earlier today, community knowledge is really important. And I've learned the most from the amazing blogs of people like Adrian Roselli, Eric Eggert, Sarah Suden, Scott O'Hara, and especially Laura Carlson's weekly newsletter. And I've collated a list of my favorite accessibility newsletters and blogs on my website, there's a link to which on the presentation page. Thank you for joining me on this Lunch and Learn. I hope that there was something of use to everyone. A special thank you to our captioner Jen and Tim and Bridget, our BSL interpreters. We can use the remaining time to try to answer any questions. Perhaps you'd like to look in more detail at something I shared, or maybe you want to share how you approach demystifying, simplifying, and amplifying accessibility at your organization. Before I start reviewing the Slido, the next session is at 1400. It's Innovation and Accessibility in Ecosystems, which looks pretty awesome and important. And do not miss the session at 16:15 GMT, user-generated accessibility information, because anything that Cam Bedouin is involved with is always going to be awesome. And you really need to check out him and his colleagues on that session. Thanks very much for listening, and I'll stop sharing and start having a look at the any questions in the Slido. So I'm going to just go by, let's see, most popular. From Kirsten, does higher education as an industry have unique accessibility challenges that don't occur in other industries? Brilliant question. Thank you, Kirsten. I'd say probably due to the breadth of the types of resource that we use at universities. For example, maths, chemistry, STEM, there's a lot of very complex notation. And I think we still haven't quite fully solved the question of how can we help our academic staff to create accessible resources in those subject areas, particularly that can be adjusted really well with our alternative formats that we offer with Blackboard Ally and Census Access. But there is a brilliant JISC Maths Ally group who are working on that. And one of my colleagues, Luke, is in there as well. I think we've only got a few seconds left. I'm going to have a look at the next one. David says, really cool and awesome. Well, thank you. Incredibly informative. Awesome. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Could you share any tips or resources to explain the importance of color contrast to marketing shareholders, asks Nikki. I would suggest ask them to say you get something with a yellow background and white text, put it on a mobile phone, ask them to go out in the middle of the day on a sunny day and try to read the text on their phone. That's a kind of situational impairment with screen glare. And then ask them to compare something with really good contrast in the experience. And then think about all of the other ways that that might appear, so that it's not only affecting those that might have an impairment or disability, or permanent disability, but those situational impairments, and how the more accessible the content, the more that everyone benefits. I think we've reached 1400. I don't want to make you late for the next session. You're welcome to get in touch with me. And if you'd like to have a follow-up to this section with AbilityNet, I'm sure if you contact AbilityNet, we could sort something out. Thank you so much for listening. And I don't know whether I'm just going to get cut off, but thanks very much. And thanks again to Bridget for still trying to deal with my rapid talking. Thank you, Bridget. And thanks, everyone, and goodbye.